Before I begin, I better apologize for something, and that is the fact that you may have difficulty hearing me. Hopefully not. But I was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 7 years ago, and one of the ways that Parkinson's affects you is your voice. You begin to lose the volume that you once had. And as a matter of fact, that was part of the reason I retired, is because I was having difficulty speaking and being heard. And so seemed to be the obvious thing to do, is to step aside and let somebody else pick up the ball and run with it. When Matt invited me to share my life story, I couldn't help but think of a book that I had read several years ago titled The Cross and the Switchblade. If you're familiar with that story, then you know it's about a fellow named Nicky Cruz, who was a gang member in New York City. And the whole book is about how he came to know the Lord and became a preacher and started winning other people to Christ as well. And when I thought about that, I thought, first time I heard that story, or read that story, I was kind of blown away. And then as I thought about sharing my life story, I thought, well, I don't have anything to share. There's nothing dramatic in my life like there was in Nicky Cruz's life. So what am I going to say? And it took me a few years before I began to realize how blessed I was to have the spiritual heritage that I had. And I thank God that I had that spiritual heritage. And I know I have something to say that's important. So here we go. February the 2nd, 1945, in a little Texas border town named McAllen, Texas, Anna and Tom Miller gave birth to their third child. They named him Robert, but everyone in the family called him Bobby and kept calling him Bobby from then on. Shortly after I was born, we moved from McAllen to a little town just about 30 miles outside of Houston, Texas. And if you're a sports fan, it's just the same Houston that has the Houston Astros that won the World Series. Go Astros. They're my team. Let's get back to my life story. I had a normal childhood, graduating high school just like most everybody else does, and went on to college. But that's when my life began to have a little bit of departure from the rest of my friends that had been in school with, or most of my friends. When they went on to college, they became preachers and teachers and doctors and lawyers and farmers and truck drivers and plumbers and electricians and so on. I instead decided to go to Bible college and become a preacher. How did that all come about? It all came about, first of all, because of my mother. My mother was the spiritual instigator in my life. Because as a child, she was the one that read us the Bible stories, prayed with us and prayed for us, and encouraged us every way that she possibly could as far as our spiritual life was concerned. I owe my spiritual heritage to her, and I thank God for her. I tell you what, it bothers me when I hear people day-to-day talk about, if a wife stays home and she says, I'm just a wife and a mother. Oh, don't minimize that role. That is probably one of the most important roles that a child can have, and that influence in that child's life. So thank God for your godly wives if you have a godly wife. But she wasn't the only spiritual influence in my life. My best bud when I was growing up, from first grade all the way up through high school and graduation, was a fellow named Dan Carroll. Dan and I played together, we fought together, we did everything together. And Dan was the kind of person that you could rely on all the time. And partly because of that, I suppose, that's one of the reasons that it didn't surprise me when he decided to go into ministry as well. I wasn't sure who influenced who the most, if I influenced him or he influenced me. But one or the other happened, and we both ended up going into ministry. As a matter of fact, when I was hospitalized back a couple of years ago after a fall, Dan came from Texas out here to visit with me. And it was a pleasure to see him again. It's the first time we'd seen each other in many years. But he made a difference in my life. Partly because of our sharing together in our commitment to ministry. we began to think about what it is we wanted to do with our lives. I knew that I wanted to do something that was going to make a difference in the lives of other people. I thought about being a teacher. I thought how important the teacher role is and how that changed lives, when they work with their students and they care about their students and help their students learn to become the people that God wants them to be. But for some reason, that idea of being a school teacher, public school teacher, just didn't resonate with me. What did resonate with me is what I saw in the lives of others at church. Because what I saw in their lives was people whose attitudes and whose actions and whose lifestyle was making a difference in those lives around them. And not just for time, but for eternity even. And the idea of being a part of something like that was especially exciting to me, the thought of being able to be a part of something like that. And so that's the reason I decided, and I think Dan did too, that we would be preparing for ministry. One Sunday, Dan invited me to go to church, where he went to church. And that day I met a fellow named Fred Millard. Fred was the preacher at the church there. And I began to get to know Fred, and in conversations with him and going places with him and listening to him and as he preached, and him listening to me as I talked and asked questions. And the more I got to know him, the better I respected him, the more I respected him. And I thought, that's the kind of person I'd like to be. That's the kind of preacher I'd like to be. And as I look back over my years of ministry, I realize I've patterned my ministry after what I saw in Fred. So Mike, I know people are watching you. People are watching all of us and when we're supposed to be Christians. And they're looking to see if what we do is equal to what we're saying. And obviously, if we are, then we're going to make an impact on their lives as well, just like Fred did on me. But Fred wasn't the only one who was a spiritual influence in my life as I was growing up. There were these guys at church called elders. And two of those men that I began to respect as elders was one man named Edward Simpson, and the other one was a fellow named Walter Rich Creek. And what I liked about these two men was that they cared about you. They encouraged you. They were interested in your life, what was happening in your life. To show you how encouraging they were, several years later when I began to go to Bible college and was studying for the ministry, I had a weekend ministry at a little church up in south central Kentucky, a little rural community that you wouldn't even know that it was there unless you happened to make the left turn at the end of the town and had to slow down for that. But Edward Simpson, that being one of those elders who was always encouraging to me, made a point one time when he was on a business trip. Now, he was on a business trip from Texas, but he came up to Kentucky where I was preaching in that area. As a matter of fact, the city where he had to come for his business meeting was about 100 miles away from where the little town was that I preached. He made a point of staying over that weekend after his business meeting was over, renting a car and driving that extra miles to come to be there in church with me, because he just wanted to do that to encourage me in ministry. The more I began to know these men, the more I began to realize those are the kind of lives that I wanted to live. That's the kind of life I wanted to live. That's the kind of impact that I wanted to have on other people around me. And so I began to respect those men as well. After graduating from Johnson Bible College, I served a couple of years at a youth ministry in a church called Cherry Avenue Christian Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. The thing that I began to realize real quickly was I didn't want to continue in youth ministry as a career. God bless youth ministers. I hope you appreciate youth ministers, because the work that they're doing is tremendously difficult. When you're dealing with young people and their emotions, ups and downs in their lives, it's tremendously exciting, but at the same time, it's tremendously difficult. But the thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to preach. One day one weekend on a trip to Atlanta Christian College with three of the teenagers from our church there at Cherry Avenue, we had the opportunity to visit with a friend that I graduated from Bible college with, a fellow named David Pryor. And David began to tell me about his work with a new church plant there where he was serving. And I began to get excited about the idea of maybe getting involved in a new church plant myself. And sure enough, within a year, David told me about a new church group that was getting started there just up the road from him, about 50 miles. And asked if I would be interested in maybe working with these folks. And I said, well, let me talk with them and find out some more about this. So I began to pray about this and talk some more with these people, found out more about the new church plant there in Cary, North Carolina was the place it was called. And so long story short, I ended up moving there and working with a new church plant for about 5.5 years. It was one of the most exciting times of my life, one of the most difficult times of my life as well. But we served there for 5.5 years until the Lord called us to another church in North Alabama, a place called Hartsville, Alabama. It's just up the road from Huntsville, Alabama. That church had been through some tremendously difficult times within the church itself. And so we went there to work with them and worked there with them for 7 years. And the Lord blessed and things calmed down in that church. And again, it was a time of tremendous blessing for us. That ministry lasted for 7 years, as I said. And then while we were there, we got a call from the church in Corinth, Mississippi, which is right up in the northeast corner of Mississippi. It's called the Walden Street Christian Church. It's an old traditional church. And quite honestly, it reminded me of the church in Sardis, the more I got to know about these people. They had all kinds of things that needed to be changed. For example, one of the things that needed to be changed was their elders had been elders for probably 25 or 30 years or more. And they were not young men who were being prepared to take over those responsibilities as these men stepped down. And so one of the things that I began to do is do some teaching and preaching about all people being part of ministry and about the responsibility of mine as well as the elders was to equip these other young men to take their places when they were no longer there. One of the attitudes that I ran into was from one of those elders was one night in an elders meeting after dealing with this subject for several weeks in a row. This elder looked at me and asked me, why are you trying to get us to do your job? Talking about my job. And I thought, I missed the boat altogether with him. He doesn't understand that part of his role is to help prepare these young men. And so I just kept trying to impress upon them that, you're not going to be here forever. And part of your role is to get these other men ready to take over the responsibility as spiritual leaders of the church. But that's the kind of attitude that was there in that church. While I was there, I went back to Kentucky Christian College and worked on a master's degree and got that work finished up before we ended up leaving that church after 5.5 years. And we went to a church in Vancouver, Washington, Columbia Christian Church. The last 24 years of our ministry we spent here at Columbia Christian. And God has really blessed me in those 24 years that we spent here. I was asked to share not only good times, but bad times in my life as well. We have faced some discouraging times, as I'm sure, Dave, you have, Mike. All ministers have, of course. By the way, history shows that young ministers coming out of Bible college, out of school, after training, those first 5 years of ministry are the most difficult years of their ministry. And there's a tremendously high dropout rate those first 5 years of ministry. What I'm trying to say is, if you ever have the opportunity to work with a fellow who's just out of school, just keep in mind that your ministry to him is just as important as his ministry to you. So you need to do everything you can to encourage him and to support him and help him to grow in ministry. Young ministers come out of school as bright-eyed and enthusiastic and very optimistic. And then they run into us, their congregation. And begin to realize that dealing with people sometimes is not as exciting as they thought it was going to be, and maybe discouraging rather than being encouraging. I still remember a cartoon that we were given when we graduated from Johnson Bible College. It shows this young man who's just graduated from Bible college, and he's in his cap and his gown, and he's got his degree in his hand, and he's shaking it in the air, and he's saying, "Here I come, world, I've got my AB." And the world is shouting back, "Come on, son, I'll teach you the rest of the alphabet." That's the reality of ministry. It's a wonder. It's probably the most exciting work that you can possibly be a part of. Have you found that, Mike? But it's also some of the most difficult times that you'll ever have. Now, I don't mean to say that you in this congregation, or any congregation for that matter, is filled with bad people. That's not what I'm suggesting. Matter of fact, the finest people in the world that I've ever known have been people who were involved in the church. But I said finest people, not perfect people. Still people. Still going to have shortcomings. Still going to have times that are going to be difficult for you. Your preacher is one of those people. He gets discouraged just like you do. So pray for him. Encourage him. Encourage him to spend time with his family regularly. Encourage him to spend time alone with God regularly. One of the things that I know I did that I found to be a blessing was I'd take one day, at least once every 3 months, if not once every month, just to get away by myself, just to have time to be alone with God. For me, the place that I would go always was out here at the Ridgefield, at the Wildlife Refuge, because I could take along some water or some juice and some crackers and my Bible, and I could spend time reading the Word or praying or singing in worship to God. And those times always were spiritually refreshing to me. Encourage your minister to do that sort of thing. You're going to find if you do, it's going to pay rich dividends, not only in his life, but in yours as well. These years have been filled not only with difficulties sometimes, though, they've also been filled with blessings and victories. Probably one of the best victories that I have ever enjoyed was the fact that God gave me a godly wife. I've already talked about how important it is, the role that our wives play. But I tell you what, my wife has been a helpmeet to me in my ministry like nobody else could. We may not appreciate how important it is to have a godly wife as a preacher. I tell you what, I've seen ministries destroyed for lack of a godly wife, for lack of a supportive wife. There's a man that comes to mind right now. I won't mention his name. But from time to time, he would fill the pulpit for us at the church where we were. If I was going to be out of town or something like that. He was tremendously gifted in preaching the Word. And I wondered, the more I was around him, the more I wondered, why are you not involved in full-time ministry? Because he had been a Bible college graduate and had the training, had the experience, and so on. But the more you got to know his wife, the more you begin to realize there was the problem. And so he could not be involved in ministry like he wanted to be because of that. I'm not suggesting that young preacher's wife is the most important role in the world, but I think if it's not the most important, it's one right up there, it's close to the top. Because she's going to be the support that he needs when nobody else is around. So, because of that, I'm thankful for my wife, the godly wife that God gave to me. Other victories include our 2 sons. My wife and I have 2 boys that we adopted. They had some difficult lessons to learn in life. And the fact that they got through them, to me, is an answer to prayer. Because they made some very poor choices on occasions. Okay, decisions that led their lives away from the Lord. But I'm so thankful that they're proof of that scripture about train up a child in the way he should go when he's old, he won't depart from it. Because they did come back to the Lord. And they're walking with God now. I'm so thankful for them. I'm also thankful for the souls that we had the privilege of being a part of, leading them to Christ. And seeing how their lives changed and how they matured in their walk with the Lord. And it's been a blessing to see those changes in their lives. It was a privilege to be a small part of that process that God was using in their life. There you have it, basically in a nutshell, the story of my life. Not a very challenging life as far as Nicky Cruz is concerned, but it's been a tremendous blessing to me. Thank you for letting me share that with you this morning. I don't know if you have any questions.
In your ministry, Bob, the big time, you just want to throw in the White House and done?
Not only throw the towel in, Matt, but I went so far one time to contact an agency that helps you find other jobs because I was so discouraged at that particular time. It's interesting to me. I said that the church people are some of the finest people I've ever known. But they've been some of the most difficult people I've ever known as well. And on that particular occasion, we had a difficult situation in the church. It was this church that I told you about. It spent 7 years at it, had some inner turmoil. What that turmoil was about was involved sexual sin. And people were beginning to divide up, take sides in this whole situation. And after working with this situation for about 2 months, I found I was so discouraged about it that I was about ready to leave the ministry. I'm thankful that God didn't let me do that. But the thought was definitely there. Yes.
Bob, I was thinking what you were saying about, I believe it was Nikki and the cross and the switchblade.
Yes.
And how much easier sometimes it is for a person that makes that kind of change in their life, because it's so the contrast between the way they have lived and what they see is available through the hope and faith in Christ, as opposed to somebody who grows up in the church.
Yes.
And having to make the decisions along the way to stay there, to serve. So I guess that isn't a question to you, but it's just an observation on my part.
Yes, and I
That
agree with you.
to compare what you've done to what he's done as being small, I don't accept your premise.
Okay.
I think that God does great things through people who are faithful, and He's obviously done that with you.
I would agree with that. I would agree with you. I think what helped me to begin to realize how blessed I was with the spiritual heritage that I had was I was challenged to do a little exercise, and I would challenge any of you to do it as well. That is to sit down and do a timeline of your life. And note the people and the places and the events in your life that have an impact on you. And if you will do that, you're probably going to find the same thing that I did. It's easy for us to look at our lives like that and not realize what God has been doing in our lives all along. Because as I did that little exercise, I began to see that God had His fingerprints on my life from the beginning, giving me a godly mother who was there to read the Bible to me, teach me how to pray for me, encourage me, and so on. She started me out in life with some spiritual values that a lot of people are not given, are not taught. And the difference that she made in my life because of those values that she implanted within me. I couldn't help but think of, we all remember the story of Hannah and Samuel in the Bible, it's written in the Old Testament. I can't help but think of Hannah as I thought about, as I read that Bible story one time. I thought, I wonder how much she talked to her son before she ever gave him to God there at the temple with Eli. I got a feeling those early years of his life, she was spending a lot of time, maybe as she nursed him, just singing songs of praise to God. And as he heard, even as a infant, hearing those songs, hearing those words, learning those values, learning that there was someone who's more important than anybody else in the world, that he could worship him, serve him, praise him. And he learned those values from, I think, there at his mother's knee. And that's where our children can learn those same values. That's the reason we need to be thanking God for godly wives if we have them. So I agree with it. And the difference that makes in your life is so important, so that you don't have to go through those times like Nicky Cruz went through. But I was naively thinking, I don't have anything to say. My story's not dramatic like his was. So I don't have anything to say. Wow, how wrong I was. Yes, ma'am.
Bob, as you look over your years of ministry, your preparation for ministry, and where it's gone, and where the church and the culture is going, what advice would you give young men who are preparing for ministry today? I teach in a Bible college, and so every once in a while, young people are asking me questions about, what's the best way for me to prepare? Just think about where the culture and the church is going right now. What would you say to young men who are preparing for ministry?
One of the things that our Bible colleges are doing today is requiring internships. When I was there at Johnson Bible College, there was a fellow that came to speak one night at chapel. His name was Tom Newland. And Don preached, and then after chapel was over, he invited anybody who was interested in getting involved in an internship to come and talk with him. This is the year in the 60s, so this is before the years of internships. I decided I had to go talk to him because there was a fellow back in Texas, back in my home church. It was named Newland as well. He was a preacher as well. And I was just out of curiosity, I thought, well, I'll go up and ask this fellow if he knows this Newland guy that's a preacher down in Texas. Turns out they were brothers. And he asked me, would you be interested in this internship thing that I talked about? I said, tell me a little bit more about it. So he did. Long story short, I ended up going there and working with him that year. And it gave me the opportunity to experience many different facets of ministry. And it gave me a more realistic view of what ministry was going to be all about. And so that helped me to be more prepared, I think, for dealing with things that came to us. I think that would be one of the things I would definitely require of a person going to Bible college for ministry, is to serve in an internship. Maybe not just a year, maybe longer, maybe shorter, I don't know. But have some real life experience. Because I came out of Bible college, like I was talking about, enthusiastic and idealistic and excited. And it didn't take long before one of the first board meetings.
Yeah.
And there's a reason they call them board meetings, by the way. And I can recall it was, I don't remember what the issue was, but it was a very volatile issue that we were dealing with. And in that particular church, ministers did not get a vote on decisions. But when they took the vote, I raised my hand to vote the way I wanted. I felt very strongly about. And the chairman of the group said, we don't count your vote. I said, maybe not, but I wanted to know where I stood. Those kind of experiences can be really discouraging for a young minister, as I'm sure you've found out. And so when you have something like that, it's really important that you've got other people there around you who are going to help you deal with it, talk through those times of discouragement. Remember that these are just still people that you're working with. They're not saints. The Bible might call them that, but they're not saintly in their lives sometimes. At other times they can be the most wonderful people in the world. But that would be the thing that I would definitely encourage, is an internship. Did the Bible college where you teach, did you have internships?
Yes.
Good. One of the things that disturbs me, and maybe you can help me to understand this. One of the things that I've noticed about young men coming out of Bible college today, it seems like they are approaching ministry from administrative roles. I want to be the administrator of the church. When I was learning about ministry, as I watched Fred here at home, my home church, I saw a person that had a servant heart. He wasn't a flashy kind of guy, but he was one of those kind of people that you could always count on to be there when you needed him. No matter what time of day it was, or night, for that matter. And I thought, that's what ministry is about. Ministry is about having a servant heart, about caring about people, about loving people. And one of the things that I've observed about so many young Bible college graduates nowadays is that they come out with this idea of, I'm the administrator, I'm here to save the day, tell everybody what to do. And I'm not sure where that comes from. Where does that come from?
I think it comes from the world.
Corporate America, yeah.
Jesus taught his disciples, look at the leaders of the world, look at the leaders of the Gentiles.
Yes.
They rule over them with great authority.
Yes.
Not so among you.
Yes.
If you're going to be a leader in my kingdom, you got to serve.
Yes. All right. Anyone else? Well, thank you for allowing me to do this morning.
Thank you.
I've got a question, Matt, as you encouraged me to bring up. So, Bob, I think this is important for all of us, probably at some point, to evaluate and come up with. The preacher in Ecclesiastes, when he finalizes his book, he says the conclusion, after all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, And it's kind of like a conclusion, a summary of life. And as we read the book of Ecclesiastes, we see, his comments about vanity, everything's vanity. But that concluding remark, I think, is the highlight of the whole book, and probably his whole life as he summarizes it for his readers and for all time. And so I asked previous men that have spoken, if you're to summarize your life and what you've seen in the church and what you would leave with these men as kind of an encouragement to them, what would be the summary or an encapsulated statement, single sentence or more, of what you would like to leave with these guys based on your experience in the Christian life?
Well, it's going to have to stay in the Word. Stay in the Word, because not only is it the power to change lives, to save us for eternity, but to make this life livable as well. I never will forget, I had a weekend ministry, as I said, when I was in Bible college. When I first started that ministry, I went up and preached with these folks and talked with their leaders and found out what their situation was. And being young in the ministry, I had no idea where I should go as far as preaching plan. What do I need to be addressing with these folks? And so I had the opportunity to sit down with the fellow who was the president of the Bible college there, Johnson. I said, what should I be preaching about? He said, just preach the Word. Just preach the Word. You're not going to go wrong there, obviously. But you're going to find what you need for your own spiritual life, as well as how to help other people in their walk with God as well. That'd be the summary that I would give, I suppose. in the Word.
Very good. Excellent.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.